Uh, Okay, I'll mention that to Dorothy because probably the time I would do that would be early March. And then usually, and I'm always adding to it, I also do a program on how to get your gardens ready in the spring. So I'll talk to Dorothy about that. And another program that I'm just starting to work on that I haven't done before is attracting birds, bees, butterflies, and other critters to your garden. So birds, bees, butterflies, and other critters, because we have foxes that always come, and it's fun to see the fox.
Oh, don't send me up. Honey, what do you have to grow to the fox?
You know what, there's two things with the fox. For one thing, and this is so funny, and I didn't believe this was true until I saw it. My husband and I throw down bird seed for the ground feeders. The fox loves the seed. They will come at night and clean up whatever seed is on the ground. And they are always looking for fresh water. And I have, we have a little goldfish pond. I say little, it's 8 foot by 8 foot about. And they come all winter and drink out of the pond, out of the edge of the pond. And in the summer, we have a very large, when I say large, it's about this large and about 18 inches deep, water for the birds, a bird bath. The red-tailed hawk comes, he sits in that bird bath and takes a bath. And then there's a rock next to that bird bath, and the fox comes, jumps up on the rock, and then brings out of the bird bath. Which is so funny. I actually have a picture of them leaping off.
What
So,
time of day does the fox usually?
you know, they will come, they're not just nocturnal, like the coyotes you only see out at night. But they will hunt in the day, especially in the late spring when they've had their babies and they have to be feeding them. I was an environmental chief for the Army for a while. And the interesting thing was when the fox are hunting, when they've had babies, they get so focused on trying to find food that you see them in the day. And sometimes they'll almost walk into you because they're so focused on trying to find a mouse or a chipmunk or whatever. And in the spring, they start to shed those beautiful coats that they have this time of year, and they look kind of mangy. And I'd always have people calling me up saying, I saw a fox, I think it's rabbit. It's rabbit, it's all like the fur's all it's shedding, like your dog shed in the spring.
If you put bird seed on the ground, don't you get rats and mice and little rodents?
Well, I've never, okay, in Eastham, I've never had a problem with rats. I did when I lived in Orleans.
In Orleans?
Yeah, in Orleans, we always had a rat problem. I took care of, I was the lead for one of the community gardens there. We were always fighting the rats, which was unfortunate. I, knock on wood, I have not had a problem with rats here in Eastham. However, the chipmunks and the squirrels, of course, love the seed also. So you're gonna see chipmunks and squirrels if you're putting seed on the ground. And it's like I go, okay, we're all God's creatures, you gotta to the ground here, so. All right, so now we're gonna talk about fragrant gardens. And probably my favorite plants in the garden are usually the fragrant ones. And I think I really got hooked on fragrant plants at 2 times. My grandmother always had a beautiful peony, which I transplanted, and you will see in this program. That plant was patented during the Civil War as a plant, and the one from my grandmother's garden is at least 70 years old. And I just keep it going. And my parents also lived in Hawaii for 10 years, and they grew bird of paradise for the floral trade. And they also had lots of gardenias, and of course gardenias have such a beautiful scent too. So that's kind of how I like Fragrance Gardens. So we'll get started. This is not, every fragrant plant. This is just highlights, and at the end, some of you may want to say, well, you know, one of my very favorite fragrant ones is, and share it with us. So we'll get going. So this is a map of Massachusetts, and most of Cape Cod, over on the the top right, you see the zones. And we are very lucky that in Barnstable County, we're actually zone 7A. 7A is the same zone as North Carolina. And why is that? It's because we are warmed by the water. I love our long falls that stay warm. Our springs come late because the water's cold, but in the fall, the water's warm and we get these wonderful long falls. So what that allows us to do is there are a number of plants that we can grow on Cape Cod that you would not see anywhere else in New England, which I think is interesting. We're very lucky that we can do that. So here I'm just showing you that there are so many plants that we can grow that the butterflies, the bees, and the birds love. Think on the top right, it's probably winterberry. My husband and I took a drive up to Wellfleet a couple of weeks ago. I was amazed how much wild winterberry was up there. When there are flocks of robins that come, and what happens with the robins, we have what I would call resident robins that stay 12 months a year. But we also get what I refer to as the tundra robins that are living further north, and now they've eaten all their food. So they come down in big flocks to Cape Cod, and they will just strip like the winterberry and holly and all kinds of things. There's a bee on a zinnia and a butterfly on a daylily. So there's lots of different plants they will go to. So the first plant I'm going to talk to you about is actually a shrub. It is a viburnum, and there are multiple types of viburnum. Viburnums are native to Cape Cod, the normal viburnum ones, but there are variations of them. And this one is a Korean spice viburnum. It has beautiful seed heads that come out fairly early spring, very fragrant, and they set berries. So the birds like the berries that are on there. So it's Korean spice viburnum, and spiced ball is a smaller variety of that. And they'll grow 4 to 8 feet and spread about the same. They have dense flowers. They bloom primarily on last year's growth. And there are some more compact ones, as I said, the spice balls, and the birds love the berries. Next, this is my grandmother's plant that you're seeing here on the top left. I love peonies, and I do a whole program on different peonies. One of the things I love about the peonies is they are blooming about the same time as iris. So if you like iris, something else to complement them is the peonies. They're very easy to grow, as long as with peonies, they grow in tubers, which are almost like fingers. And the secret with peonies is they can't be planted too deep. They should be on Cape Cod almost planted that you can see the top of the tubers. And what happens very typically is you may plant them that way, and if you mulch your garden, year after year, the mulch piles up, and now they're an inch or two deep, and they may not bloom. So you need to make sure that they're up near the top.
When is a good time to dig them up and move them up?
September is the best time to transplant them, but I will tell you that when I lived in Orleans and we had our house built on Dire Prince Road in Eastham, I was moving in May. And I moved my peonies in May, and they all survived, and a bunch of them even blew that year. So you can do it in spring, it's better in September.
How deep, the tubers aren't the only roots, are they? I mean, how deep would you dig if you wanted to lift it?
I usually take, to do the peonies, I take pitchfork. So that hopefully I'm not damaging those tubers. And I put it in and I try to lift it up. Because the tubers will have little tiny roots that come down off them. You usually don't have to go down much further than maybe 6 or 8 inches to lift them, but you want to go all the way around them. So, I don't know, how are you? They do prefer full sun, and like I said, they love to grow where the irises like to grow. This was my house in Orleans. You can see all the irises and the peonies are there. They're not really that tall. They're 2 to 3 feet. They bloom in early to mid-June. The old varieties are very fragrant. Some of the newer varieties have been bred for color and they don't have a lot of fragrance. So you kind of have to look up the variety if you're going to put them in. And again, the biggest thing is the eyes need to be at ground level or not more than 1 inch deep. In the fall, if they're herbaceous, and by herbaceous, I mean that they die back in the winter. You cut them back to 2 to 3 inches, and the stems will die back at ground level, and they can be cut back later, but I typically do it at that time. Festiva Maxima, which I showed you, which was white with a little bit of the red in the center, is not susceptible to powdery mildew. But I have a number of peonies in my garden that are susceptible to powdery mildew. Well, powdery mildew is kind of that white that you get on some of the leaves. It does not hurt the plant, it just looks ugly. And if you have a peony which has powdery mildew and you don't like how it looks, by the time you get to end of August, it's okay to cut it down if you so desire. Here are 2, C.L. Fernari is the wonderful lady who does the garden talk on public radio on Saturday mornings. She too is a master gardener. And here are 2 of her favorites, Raspberry Sundae and Pink Parfait, and both of those are very fragrant. Gardenias. There are frost-proof gardenias. I have found them on the Cape at the big garden center that's in Hyannis, and you can mail order them. They say they last year after year, but if we get a really cold winter, they're goners. However, and they're a shrub. However, the smell is so wonderful on them, and they will push out a lot of blooms in May to June, and then you'll get 1 or 2 sporadically through the summer. And if you walk out next to them and there's one blooming, it's like, what's that smell? This is how I actually got one that came to me mail order. Sometimes, I think I got that at a place called Fast Growing Trees. They will sometimes at Mother's Day particularly be selling them all in bud like that. So I like them. I don't always put them in because I usually lose them in 2 to 3 years. So you have to think about, okay, do I want to make the investment in them for a couple of years? Because if we get a really cold winter, they're probably not going to make it, even though they say they will. And I did add a lot of mulch to them. The nice thing is they're evergreen, so they can stay green through the winter and give you some green foliage color. They like to be planted in the spring or midsummer, and they like a lot of fertilizer. And we have very acidic soil on Cape Cod, and the nice thing is they like acidic soil. So they do fairly well for us. Um, this is a southern magnolia, Magnolia grandiflora. They are fabulous. We are about the only place in New England that they will grow, although I did see one in Springfield when I was going to college. They are wonderful. There are two very large ones that I can think of on the Cape. One is next to the Edward Gorey house. Behind it, it's huge. And the other one is in Orleans, right behind the Cape Cod 5. That is also an Edith Bogue. There are a couple of varieties. Edith Bogue I particularly like because it has a very nice shape and it loves salt air. So it does very well here. It is evergreen. The floral trade loves the leaves because they use them in bouquets through the winter because they will stay green for a long time in a vase with flowers. And the underside of these leaves are kind of brown. They get beautiful big flowers. When I lived in Orleans, I lived off of Rock Harbor Road on a little street called Penny Lane. I lived like half a block in. It was by the senior center. They actually used to have people who were walking the street come down to see what the fragrance was. Because when they bloom, they have a very strong and very nice fragrance. The other thing with them is they get these really cool looking seed pods. And you will see those if you go in the fall over to the Cape Cod 5 and see it in Orleans. But this top left photo is one, that was my first house in Eastham. And it got very large. It was lovely. This is one that I planted in Orleans. And it bloomed like the next year after we put it in. Bracken Brown Beauty is a similar one. It is more conical in shape, sort of high where the Edith Bogue is kind of a little shorter and squattier. There are some miniature versions. Teddy Bear and Little Gem are both two that grow smaller. They say the southern magnolias will grow to 60 feet. I think the one in back of the Edward Gorey house, which is probably the oldest one on Cape Cod, is probably more than 30 feet. I don't think in our climate they would get that big. I think that we would be safe at 20 to 30 feet. And they do spread. The other thing is it's hard to plant anything underneath them because the roots come sort of at the surface. And sometimes I like to put things underneath my plants. But they're great. And the one thing I would say is because the leaves are so big, if we get a heavy snow, it can break some of the branches. So what I do is when I put one of these in, the first 2 or 3 years, I cut off half of the new growth. And I do that at end of November, beginning of December. So I have those nice branches of leaves to use in floral arrangements. What that does is it concentrates the stem and makes it grow thicker so it's less resistant to damage from snow. Here are some pros and cons in them, and I like to put this because there can be some significant cons. The pros are that there are large fragrant flowers, and like I said with the gardenias, they'll also push out a bloom, a couple blooms in July and August. As I said, the foliage is great for the holidays. They have the interesting seed pods that I've actually used in wreaths, and they're evergreen. As I said, underplanting is difficult. They give very dense shade and the grass won't even grow underneath them. They do shed leaves through the year because they're evergreen. So they're gonna shed a few leaves and the leaves are big. So not that I find that that's a problem, but they do shed some leaves and they can get large if they're not pruned. And sometimes they're difficult to find. And like I said, I like to prune them so that they don't get wind or snow damage. Sweet alyssum, and you see this in the garden centers all the time. It's an annual, here it's an annual. Again, high scent that you will, we have enough. Oh, yeah. I didn't even notice that we had that up there.
It covers up some of the table.
Thank you for doing that.
Sorry about that. I don't see it on the screen.
So sweet alyssum, it's wonderful if you're doing garden pots in your garden. It makes a nice accent, easy to grow, easy to find. You just treat it as an annual, cut it back about ½ an inch after the first flush of blooms, and you'll get more blooms. So that's the way you deadhead it. What is nice is you don't have to do individuals. I just take a scissor or a pruner and take like ½ an inch off. And in another 4 weeks or so, you have another nice big bloom. And they don't like to dry out. So you have to just, particularly if you have them in pots, you need to make sure that they have some moisture. Butterfly bush. And there are many varieties of these. The butterflies love them, and they do have a very sweet scent. There are a lot of dwarf varieties that only grow 3 to 4 feet, because the older varieties, they can get to be huge. With the butterfly bushes that I have, I cut them back to about 18 inches every fall. And by the time it's June, they're all grown up and they have their blooms. So you can really severely prune them. They're very fragrant. I even like them in cut flower arrangements because they have that sort of weepy look to them. And they come in a variety of colors too. I did that year that winter we had like no blue hydrangea blooms because it was so cold that one night. It actually killed a few of the butterfly bushes. Most of them came back, but it did kill a few of them. So they're usually pretty hardy, but I mean, that was just, man, I hope we don't get another winter like that. When December was so cold, I was going, no, don't do a really cold night in the winter again. Oriental lilies, and there are a lot of varieties of these. These are the ones that in the grocery store, you find the red and white ones are stargazers. Some of the white ones are called Casablanca. Very, very fragrant. And often I'll go into Shaw's at this time of year and they have like the 3 bouquets for $15, and they'll have some lilies and I'll put them in the center. And they are even more fragrant at night for some reason than they are in the day. And I'm not sure why that is. And that's as a cut flower as well as in your garden. The one thing I would also mention is on the bottom right are the Casablancas, and they will grow in what they call a tree form of lilies. They will grow 6 to 7 feet tall after they've been in the ground for a couple years. These are bulbs. I love white in the garden, and they give you a wonderful show of white. And the reason I like white in the garden is because of the evening and the twilight and the night, the white shows up. So even though I love my colors, I always try to have quite a bit of white in the garden because that's what shows up at night. And I think that's fun to have. Depending on the variety, they'll grow anywhere from, there are some minis that will grow like less than a foot, but most of them are 20 to 22 inches, and the tree forms will go 3, 4, 5 feet tall. They're very, very fragrant. They have multiple flowers. The bulbs, once they're established, actually multiply. So you'll have more that will come up in the same area, which is quite nice. You plant them in early spring or early fall. Obviously, if you do it in late fall, you won't get a bloom that year, but you should the next. And they like to be mulched. And again, they like our acidic soil and they have very average water needs. If you remove the flowers after they fade, that helps the flowers that are still in bud to come out and be as big as possible. Because it's not, the plant isn't putting its energy into making seeds. So it's good to cut them out. Here's the Casablanca. That's my favorite. I have that by my front door. I just love them. They do sometimes need staking after they've been in the ground a couple years because they have so many flowers at the top, they start to fall over. But that's pretty easy. You can just put a stick or something in the ground and tie it up. It's not a huge job. Clethra, or summer sweet, or pepper bush. This is a native. And the white one, you will often see growing wild along the edges of the marshy areas. Very, very sweet, very sweet. Are you seeing that message, Tom? John? It's January 2nd, what do you want, right? So there are some hybrid varieties of this, such as Ruby Spice, which I really like. They're the pink ones. But these are really nice because the common ones are a native and the bees love them. The bees are always all over these. They really, really like them. Okay, John, it's not letting me go to the next slide. You're earning your money today. Okay, it went, thank you. Thank you. They are not fussy at all. You can prune them in the fall. They do bloom on new wood, so you don't have to worry about cutting off the old. They grow in full sun or part shade, and they do tolerate full shade. Some of the ones I have are almost in full shade, and again, they're acid loving, so they love our soil on Cape Cod. And they're, like I said, they're a nice deciduous shrub, so they lose their leaves in the fall. And they bloom midsummer to early fall. So again, when a lot of things have gone by and the bees are looking for nectar, that's why the bees are all over them. Corkscrew vine. About 5 years ago, my husband and I went to Mystic Seaport to visit, and we were walking around and going, what is that fragrance? What is that plant I keep smelling? And along a little white picket fence, they had the corkscrew vine. And it almost looks like a wisteria. It is a vine. It is a tropical plant. So if you plant it and leave it in the ground, it will die. I have experimented and brought it in over the winter, and you can get them to overwinter in the house. I tend to think that's too much work and just bought another one in the spring. They bloom towards the end of the summer, and they grow very fast in warm weather, and they will crawl up anything that you have. One I had one year actually went up a holly tree that I had. Extraordinarily fragrant and beautiful when you look at those unusual flowers. And you can find them, I've never found them at a nursery, but a lot of the seed and plant catalogs will have them. And you can order them. And they'll come as this little dinky plant in like a 4-inch pot, and you plant it once it's nice and warm, like in June, and it just takes off and grows like crazy. It can grow very quickly to 25 feet. I'm sure that one I had on the holly bush went that high. Again, extraordinarily fragrant. This was another one people would walk down the street and go, what is that smell? And very, very unusual. And they're very good in containers, and if you want, you can do them in a hanging basket and keep their tendril like going around. Now, here are some old standard favorites. Hyacinths in April and May, and our narcissus, which are also April or May. Those are fun, and those are bulbs, and they keep coming back. Lilacs. And again, with the lilacs, it's the old varieties that are really fragrant. Some of the newer ones, they've bred them for the color, and they're not as fragrant. Honeysuckle, and there are a lot of varieties of honeysuckle. They come in many colors. I have two honeysuckle that go up sort of over a trellis in my garden, and they bloom pretty much constantly from June to August. And again, the bees really like them, and they're very fragrant, and they do come in a lot of different colors. Lavender, the bloom time depends on the variety. There's one I particularly like that's called, I think it's called Exceptional, is I think the name of it, and it'll just get to be a large dense plant. And with lavender, the less you do to it, the better it is. So in the fall, I just shear off the blossoms, let it go, and it comes back. Some varieties, I've had trouble getting it to winter over, but some of them do very well. Hosta, most of the white blooming hosta can be very fragrant. And I always put those white blooms of the hostas in my cut flower bouquets too. And that's, we don't think of that with hosta. And again, they're blooming in the July-August timeframe. That's all I had. Who can name some other ones that are fragrant that you like? Nicotiana. Say it again. Nicotiana. I call it Nicotiana, but yeah, yeah. Tomato. Yeah, that's one that you can, Nicotiana or Nicotina. You can find that easily in the garden centers in the annual area. And when I was in college and I grew up in the Berkshires, my summer job was I worked on the family farm of some people we went to church with. And in the spring, I would sell annuals and perennials. And in the summer, we did the vegetables, et cetera, et cetera. And it was funny because teenagers would come in and they would think it was marijuana because the leaves look very similar to cannabis. Yeah, it was funny. When I see the coach, I always think about that. What's another one?
Well, oh no, I had a question.
Okay, you do questions. We can do questions then.
The peonies, flop over. So do you have any suggestions on how to prop them up?
There's two things you can do, and my husband laughs at me because I started out, I'm so good about doing this. When they first start to come out, there are round rings that have like a grid.
Yeah.
And they'll grow through it, and as they grow up, there are legs on that round, and that'll keep them up. I get lazy. I put those in the ground, forget about them. But there are others, the other one that I really like, and you can get at Ocean State, a lot of different places, it's like two legs and a curved center. That does very well on keeping them up. And there are some varieties, when I do the peony lecture, there is a tree peony and a Ito, which is an intersectional. It's kind of a hybrid between a herbaceous and a tree. I found the Itos don't need staking at all.
Yeah.
And I like the Itos. The Ito peonies, they're the ones that you occasionally see. They're brilliant yellow.
Yeah.
Which is a really unusual color. That's usually an intersectional Ito. But I like those curved ones. And they're inexpensive. And then after they bloom, I just pull them out of the garden and store them for next year. You can tie them, but and those are not very expensive. Who's got another?
Another one I like is I don't know if you said it earlier, the Korean spice kush by Burnham.
Yes, that was,
Lovely scent.
that was one of the first ones that I had. And I actually put those underneath the bedroom window because it's really nice in the spring when they're blooming, to have a window open a little and it kind of fills the house with its scent. But yes, I love the Korean spice. Really, really nice. Who else has one that you like that's fragrant?
What did you say the name of the lavender was that you really liked?
I think it's called Exceptional. I always get the name, it's something like that. It's like an adjective name that begins with E, and I think it's Exceptional. And you can find it, I found that that's the one that tends to grow the best in our climate. Others? Yeah.
I have, like a carnation, the carnation.
Yeah, the carnations too. You know, the carnations have, I think, a very clean smell to them almost. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody else have one you can think of? Or any questions that you have? And you can ask questions other than just this. If you have burning questions that you want to ask, I can bring my shot at trying to
I have a
answer.
burning question. I have a Japanese maple.
Yes,
It's out in front of my, I got a lot of wind.
yep.
And, it just seems like it's not doing well. I had one suggestion to move it out of the wind. I mean, is this a general, because my house is 2 rows back from the ocean. But the wind seems to be an issue that I didn't know, I just moved here.
Let me ask you a question. How much sun does it get?
It's out there in the sun,
All right,
so too
that,
much sun, that's more?
yeah, that may be more of the issue.
Yeah, okay.
The, Japanese maples tend to like to be an understory tree.
Yeah.
They like it in the semi-shade, and I've had exactly that problem. When I first put in a Japanese maple, I put it in full sun, thinking, oh, it's a tree, it's gonna love full sun. No, I had to move it.
I see.
So, wind might be a little bit of an issue, but I think it's the sunlight that's more of the issue.
Okay.
We had in our little subdivision, they put in a Japanese maple to commemorate somebody, and it just struggled. And so we moved it to under a story tree, and it is like going crazy. So I think it's the light probably.
Okay.
So if you're gonna move it to somewhere where there's a little bit of shade.
Just a little bit of shade or 50-50 or lots of shade or?
The one that I moved, I would say is 80% shade.
Really?
But I think as long as you have like 50-50, you're probably okay. Anybody grow Japanese maples?
I have one in my backyard and it's maybe only 8 feet from the wooded area behind.
Right,
And it just is so happy and it gets afternoon sun.
but it's probably
But
gonna shade in the morning.
enough of it, I think.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
it's probably 50-50-ish, so.
I didn't plant it, so it's
Yeah.
been there for years.
But yeah, Japanese maples, it's usually more the sunlight than anything.
Does that include all of the varieties, the needle point and the?
That I'm not 100% sure of.
Okay.
I have some Bloodgood, which is a variety of Japanese maple. That'll take a lot more sun.
Mm,
Those that I have are probably in the sun 80% of the day.
okay.
I have a skeeter grow, but that's in the sun all the time and
It does
Lovely.
okay. So it probably depends on the variety. I would say, in general, most of them will like a semi-shade or some shade, but there are probably varieties that will.
Okay.
And I would say, some of the ones that I've seen, I visited a garden where the people who owned it just loved Japanese maples, and they had a lot of varieties. One of the things they said is the more colorful the leaf, the more dense the shade.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know, they weren't master gardeners, so I don't know if that's true. There's one that's called Orangina, which has a very orangey leaf. It's really hard to find. I'd love to find one. But they had that almost totally in the shade. And it was nice because it was like a dark area and there was this pop of orange leaves on this little tree. I mean, it wasn't real big, it was probably 6 foot tall. But a lot of the weeping forms of the Japanese, they want quite a bit of shade. So, but yeah, there probably are definitely some varieties, but I have a feeling that it's probably light more than rain.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is so unrelated. I bought a large, pot of Nile lilies at a church,
Yeah.
fair. And they seem to be above ground, a lot of the bulbs, maybe they were in a pot or something. So I didn't know how, they're in the ground and they seem to have lived, but they've never bloomed yet, because I just got them last year.
Well, see if they make it. Some of the, ones that you buy are tropical and they won't make it. There's, a beautiful pink lily. I don't have a picture of it in here, but, it's supposed to be tropical. And, the first year that I was in the new house that we're in, I put 2 in the ground, thinking, it's tropical, it's not coming back. One of the 2 comes back every year. When I've had my house on tour, people will go, it's right near my fish pond. And people go, how did you do that? And it's like, I don't know, it's back every year. It just likes it there. So some of them are tropical and it's just gonna die. I had a friend in New York City who said, I had this great lily, I'm sending you the bulbs. And, they never came up. I think it must have been a tropical. So it depends.
Sure. Do you have any tips on limelight? I have 2 limelight, ton of sun, falling over with blooms that are
So heavy.
unbelievably huge, and I cannot keep it upright. I've cut it back, and I get, therefore, these little stems that definitely can't hold the blooms. I don't know what to do with it.
Limelight, limelight will bloom on new growth. And so you're right. You can cut the limelight back to 18 inches or so. But there are certain of those, panicula hydrangeas that end up being very floppy. And limelight is one of them, which is why a lot of people have gone to little limelight, which is smaller and doesn't flop as much. Just as I mentioned to this gentleman, about the peonies, the limelights, if you can, corral them some way with either, plant stakes, or sometimes I've actually seen people take like a heavy twine and go around them to keep them upright, but they're beautiful, and like you said, the blooms are huge, but they are very floppy.
I would have to put a fence up. They're
Yeah,
probably 10 feet tall.
yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
How much do you cut them down?
Well, not enough. I cut them all back except for the largest stem. And I thought, oh, well, this is gonna be perfect. Well, it wasn't, because it's spreading all this new growth from the ground. And then that one large one had the largest blooms I've ever seen. And it's like,
And like,
they're still over.
you know, I always think, this is always funny to me, when we cut back shrubs, I think they think we're killing them. So they go, man, I'm gonna foil you, I'm gonna put out more shrubs.
How do you do that with lilacs?
Yeah.
To break the bark and make them think they're dying. And
Yeah.
they'll come back and bloom.
There was a master gardener, and when she said this in a lecture, the man who runs the master gardener program is sitting there rolling his eyes. She swore that the only way she got her lilacs to bloom was she would take a broom and beat them. I don't think there's anything scientific about that. I would try, even with that main leader, I would try cutting them back to waist height.
I will.
And you can do that, you can do it fall or spring. If you do it in the spring, do it before it starts to get green.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Even when they're like 8 feet tall?
You can. I think if it was 8 feet tall, what I think I would tend to do is the first year, I try to take it back to about 5 feet. Now, it's still gonna poke out a lot of growth, and then the next year, maybe take it to 4 feet and keep going down a little bit. Because you don't want to kill it.
All right, mine don't flop and they make sort of a nice hedge, but they're
Don't,
awfully big.
don't worry about it. Or just trim like the top foot off, and they'll probably get bushier.
Yeah, I'd like more blooms down where I can reach them.
Yeah, I would take like the top foot, if you're not having a problem with them flopping over, I just take the top foot off them.
Okay, before, like in March or April?
Yeah, anytime you're out there in the early spring, before they've started to push their leaves out. You can do it in the fall too, but the spring is okay on them, they're not difficult. If anybody has the blue hydrangeas, and I often get the question, why aren't my blue hydrangeas blooming anymore? Blue hydrangeas like to have a lot of air circulation. And what you need to do is, you need to thin them. Now, blue hydrangeas, typically except for some of the newer varieties, tend to bloom on old growth. So I mean, a mop head is not something you're gonna cut down to like 2 feet or something, and it drives me crazy because some of the landscapers who don't know the difference do that, and then there's no blooms the next year. But with the blue hydrangeas, what you do is you try to go ground level with pruning, and you take out about 1/3 of the oldest growth. So your really big stems that you see, you take out about 1/3 of them, as close to ground level as you can get about every other year. And what that does is it kind of opens them up so they get more air. And that's the right way to be pruning your blue hydrangeas. Because sometimes as they get older, they get so dense, they stop blooming, and you have this beautiful green bushy plant, but you don't have any blooms. We do the blue hydrangeas because they're our signature on Cape Cod and we want to see the blue. So.
When do you cut the dead blooms off?
With the blue hydrangeas, you can cut them off anytime. You can cut them off as soon as they finish blooming. I tend to like the blue hydrangeas as they turn their multiple colors into the fall. Personally, I usually prune them, when I say prune, deadhead, like end of October, beginning of November.
Is there any reason to not do it now?
You can do it now. I mean, I have a neighbor at the end of Dyer Prince Road. She leaves the blossoms, the dead blossoms on all winter. And then in the spring, she was cutting them off. The mop heads are not fussy about when you deadhead. So, and I would say, when you're deadheading your blue hydrangeas, what you want to do is, you want to make the cut just above where there's a bud for leaves. And if you can, do it on a diagonal. And the reason on a diagonal is if you do it flat, when it rains, the water can get into it and start to kill the stem. So try to do it on a diagonal and cut it just above a leaf node. And you'll see where there's going to be leaves. Yes.
Well, I have a lace cap that's not too big,
Mm-hmm.
and so I want to reshape it so it's smaller. Is this a good time to do that, or should I wait till spring?
I think I would wait until March to do it.
March.
And again, you may suffer, not get that many blooms this year from it, but I would wait till March to do it.
Okay.
So we're starting to get the warmer days. But you'd be okay with that. There's a variety, as I'm working on that new presentation on birds and bees and different things that love the gardens. There's a variety of lace cap I want to put in my garden next year that's called Haas Halo. And it is not sterile. So the bees love it. You know, if you think of, how many times have you ever seen a bee on a hydrangea? You just don't, they're sterile. So the bees aren't on them. The Haas halo is a native and it is not sterile and the bees love it. And it-
What color is it?
White, pure white, which is very nice, too. I should have said that, it's pure white. I haven't seen them in the garden center very often. In fact, I haven't seen them. I said to the person that had gotten them, and he said, yeah, I went up to the native nursery up near Worcester. I said, well, maybe I have to make a trip.
I have some perennials, Millennium, the onion plant, I don't know the
Yeah.
scientific name. The bees love it. There's
Yeah,
probably 50, 60 bees
Yeah.
on it every day.
yeah, yeah.
There were so many bees, I started putting the plants in the front of the house, in the back of the house, so
So
that
there's
the
different places
yeah.
to come.
honeybees,
Yeah, the little honeys,
the
yeah.
honeybees are all over it.
And what's nice about the honeybees is they're very docile.
Oh, yeah, I can walk right in there.
Yeah,
There can be 50 of them around and I can do my thing and they don't bother you.
Unless you like put your hand on them, like I have occasionally, they've been on a tomato blossom, I haven't realized I put my hand on it and got stung.
Yeah.
But actually, I know beekeepers who say they actually pet them.
I can walk all through the garden and they will
Yeah,
not bother you.
No, the bumblebees, that's a different story, but the honeybees, which are smaller,
Yeah,
they're very
they're all
docile.
over.
There's another, flower that I like, it's called, pink turtlehead. It grows and it blooms sort of mid-September into October, and again, the bees are all over it because there's not that much that's blooming at that time of year. And it's an attractive plant, I like it in cut flower regions. Anything else?
How do you know the difference, what hydrangeas you can cut and which you can't?
It depends on the variety.
Right.
Um,
But if you don't know the varieties or any other.
Okay, what we affectionately call mop heads, which are kind of the round heads. Not all of them, but most of them are the ones that, and they grow, very densely from one area at ground level and up. Those are typically the ones that bloom on old growth. Now, endless summer is a new variety. It'll have some blooms on new growth also. That year that we had that cold spell, like we didn't have blue hydrangeas, the ones in the front of my house are endless summer, and I did get some blooms, but it was nothing nearly like what we would usually get. The ones that grow more, and usually those mop heads are, not more than like 3 feet tall, maybe 4 or 5 if it's an old plant. The paniculas are the ones that typically have the cone-shaped flowers, and they bloom later. Your mop heads are gonna bloom primarily in early to mid-July. And then the paniculas, which are the conical ones, and they're more weepy, they're more in the August timeframe, and they will bloom on old and new woods typically.
An old and new.
So you can cut them
Oh.
way back.
Oh, okay.
The ones that get weepy and bloom in mostly in August. And most of the paniculas are either white or there's like strawberry vanilla, which is a pink and a white. Sometimes you have them all pink. So those are the
But the
ones
blue ones, you can't cut them, but you can take off the flowers.
you can take off the flowers.
And you said you take out the third,
Correct, correct.
but you don't cut them all the way down.
No, don't cut them all the way down,
Thank you.
or you won't have flowers next year, and your neighbors will be there.
All right,
So,
got it.
go ahead.
I'm gonna switch it up and ask you about roses.
Yep,
So I planted 3, big Austin roses. And, last year, well, March of last year. Came up beautiful. They're still kind of coming up and they're still trying to blossom. Should I cut those 3 down?
okay, the question was about the David Austin roses, and I have to tell you, I'm not a rose expert by any means. my idea of a rose is the cascade or drift that I can cut right down and it just comes back up and you can't hardly kill it. The David Austins, I would let them just let them do their thing. And then when you're at the end of the winter, like in March or early April, look for any dead wood on them and prune it. And with the David Austin, as you do with Cascade or Drift or Knockout Roses, heavy feeders. And I like what they call the systemic rose food. It's like a fertilizer and an insecticide, a fungicide. It's like a 3-in-1. It's a granular. You can get it almost anywhere. But with the roses, what I always do is I feed them in the spring. As soon as they flower, I cut them back. I feed them again. You get another burst of flowers, do the same thing, cut the flowers off, feed them again, and you may get a third bloom of roses.
I mean, they've got buds.
Yeah, well, that's nice, and,
That's crazy.
yeah,
I've got one rose bush that just keeps growing.
I know that.
But it,
Right.
Yeah, but no matter what the temperatures, yeah, I know, I have, the dirt roses by the front door, and people come at Thanksgiving and go, you got roses blooming. And yeah, they seem to be very hardy.
I have a strawberry vanilla hydrangea tree, a
Yeah.
small one. But it'll bloom, but very small, little blooms. I can't seem to get it to
Is it in a nice sunny location?
sunny
Yeah,
all the
that's
time.
it, and they like the sun.
Yeah,
I would say, make sure you give it a good dose of fertilizer.
when the tree company comes and they do my trees, they fertilize that too.
I would still get like some plant tone in the spring.
Plant
Give them
tone
an
and put in the
extra,
spring,
an extra hardy, I'd give them
plant tone, yeah.
plant tone. And plant tone, anything by Espona that ends in tone is organic. And, like, my gardens, I get like 150 pounds and everything gets plant tone in the spring. But even though you're, whoever's doing your landscape, maybe
I don't have
fertilizer.
anyone doing landscape, they just come and fertilize the trees, so I don't have to fertilize some of the trees.
With them, because they have a bloom, I put extra on and see. It's hard with some of those tree forms because they've grafted them.
Yeah.
And I've heard some people say that because of the grafting, and some of them you see, they're just gorgeous.
I've seen photos of them and they're gorgeous, and mine are like these little
Little
tiny
tiny.
nothing.
I would try more fertile.
When do you know to use holly tone or plant tone?
They're pretty similar. Holly tone is usually for anything that's evergreen, like your rhododendrons, your holly, if you have any fir trees, bird nest spruce, Albertas, anything that's evergreen, it's better to use holly tone. And I just put plant tone on everything. And if I'm lazy and I don't have holly tone for my evergreens, I throw
Plant tone. Okay.
So it's, yeah, I do. I do.
Yeah, because I usually use the holly tone on the hydrangea.
And that's fine. They're pretty mix and match. The numbers on them are pretty darn close. They're not a big difference, but yeah, I do. And I typically, because I have so many perennials in the garden, the one thing I don't do in my garden, I don't put down mulch because I take 25 cubic yards of mulch, so I pay somebody to put down mulch. So just before they're gonna come, and they come early, because if stuff has started to grow, it's harder for them to put the mulch down. So I just go around, I everything before they put the mulch.
I have trouble with overly hydrangeas. I have three and I bought 2 of them. Is there a special place for them, or like shade, or it's in a nice spot right now?
I have to tell you, I don't know a lot about Everglades hydrangeas. Was one in more of a shady area?
What kinds of trees are-
No, that one has to be some. That one I don't know because I don't grow, you know. Does anybody grow oak leaf?
I have one.
Have you had any problems with growing?
I had it like shade, the one I had, the sun didn't do well.
Maybe.
We have it in the shade too, and we're lucky if we get 2 blooms on this big book. We've cut it totally down,
And
it's ready to be part.
How about yours?
Ours is in more of a, you know, part shade, part sun, and it's very happy.
Yeah.
So it may be, listening to this, maybe it needs a little bit more shade.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I, you know, kind of the rule of thumb for me is, if something hasn't done what it's supposed to do after 2 years, move it. If you like it, try to move it. So, but yeah, it might be the sun level. I'm just not sure. Some hydrangeas really want to have some shade. So,
We inherited all these lilac bushes, we cut down trees, so they've gotten more sun, but they're still so scraggly, and I keep reading that. I don't want to be down, it's so green too. I don't know if you have any recommendations about.
are they, when they bloom, are they the purple, yeah, okay. They over time will get straggly looking, and if I were you, I would cut them down to about waist height.
Okay.
And see if that causes them to get bushier and be less straggly looking.
Okay, it's
I
just-
wouldn't cut them to like a foot or two. I think I would do them, you know, about waist height
Okay,
and see how you do. Again, they're hard to kill. So, you know, giving them a good haircut, I don't think it's gonna really hurt them.
okay, so after they bloom in the spring, then,
You can do, you know, I would do it in March.
oh, really?
Yeah, I would do it in March before they start to push out their buds. You could do it after they bloom, but I would do it before it starts to leaf out.
Okay.
Most of my pruning, almost anything that I prune, other than fruit trees should be pruned in the winter, like in February, but everything else, usually I'll prune in like March-ish. Did you have a question?
Well, I have, didn't you mention fruit trees that, gum trees that don't do anything, you know, and, so, and I have a crab apple, ornamental crab apple that got really tall. Would I be able to prune that down, like I do a heavy pruning? in the
Yes,
winter?
you can do a heavy pruning. Look online for the right way. Every fruit tree has like a different way you're supposed to
Right.
prune them. And I would say on the plums are very, very dependent on how cold it is when they set their flowers. Does it flower?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one plum tree that had so many plums one year, it was breaking its limbs.
Oh,
Even when, you know, with fruit trees, you're supposed to, like, if it's in a cluster, you're supposed to take it out, so, you know, you've got a couple of fingers in between, so, like that plum tree, I was out there practically every day pulling plums off of it. But the last 2 years, when it's bloomed, we've had a cold night,
oh, yeah.
and I didn't get a single plum.
Oh.
Where the apples are a little bit more tolerant. And the peaches are a little bit more tolerant, but plums, they don't like those cold nights if they've set their homes. And it didn't even go down to freezing, because I kept watching the temperature, saying, don't go down to 32, don't go down to 32.
Uh-huh.
And it was like 38, and I still lost all the plum blossoms.
Mhm.
I didn't have a single plum. So some are fussier than others, but when they bloom and they don't have a cold night, you can get a good crop.
Smoking pot.
Anything else? Well, you guys have happy gardening. It's always good to come and see you. I was worried because Windmill Whispering wasn't out yet, and I called the other day and said, am I gonna have anybody? And they go, yeah, you got a good crowd coming, so, and we did, so I'm glad. John, you didn't see any questions on it? Okay, good, all right. Good, good. Enjoy and happy gardening. How's that? All right.
Oh, God, what's going on?
No, we're not doing the car.
You were the hardy one that came out. I have a lifetime Instagram. Yes, I got my 10 years. I live on Dark Horse Road. Yes, there are. They always think I stay up. I just, I'm on. And I said, yeah. And I go,